Good afternoon, professor in class. Vince here. So I'm here to present my video submission as a part of a partial requirement for the class federal income taxation. This week we're talking about tax laws relating to the at-risk rules and limitations. I hope this addition to the discussion can help you understand what I've learned from my research on this topic. So, what are at-risk rules and limitations? The at-risk rules and limitations are tax laws that considers the rejected losses in excess of an investment that an individual or a business entity can claim to reduce their tax liability. As per the Office of Law Revision Counsel from the House of Representatives, providing guidance to the IRS regulations, losses incurred from a business investment can be deducted to reduce the tax liability of an entity, which is an individual or a business. For losses to be deducted, the tax code stipulates that the investor must have risk in the investment. An investor that has no risk or a limited risk in the business is limited in how much deduction he may claim on his return. So, in other words, an individual or a business entity can reduce their tax liability by the amount of the actual losses incurred for the year. So, which is also limited by your involvement in the business activity itself. For example, if you're a stakeholder and you invested 10K in a startup in 2019, and the company doesn't do well and they fold before the end of the year, obviously before the end of the year, in 2020, your losses for the amount of 10K can be recognized as a loss of your as a loss on your tax return for this current year, for 2020. Now, you won't be able to recover the whole 10 grand back. Instead, you can realize a percentage of that loss to lower your tax liability. So, the IRS publication that identifies and addresses these rules is Publication 925. It addresses two sets of rules that may limit the amount of deductible losses that a trade, business, or rental or other income-producing activity. The first part of the publication discusses the passive activity rules. The second part of the publication discusses the at-risk rules. So when an individual figures out the allowable losses from an activity, you must apply the at-risk rules before you can apply the passive activity rules. To get further details, check out the IRS website to get a detailed guidance on these actual activities, right? But to shed some light on who or which individuals are subjected to these at-risk rules stated in the publication, I'm going to give you guys a list. Basically, the publication addresses anyone with an involvement in any of the following trades or businesses or participation in in the production of income. Anyone that's holding or producing or distributing motion picture films or videotapes. Anyone that's in farming, leasing activities, leasing section 1245 property, including personal property and certain other tangible properties that's depreciable or amortizable. Anybody that's exploring or exploiting oil and gas. Furthermore, somebody that's exploring or exploiting geothermal deposits. And basically, all of this, if a summary of all of it, if it's not addressed in one of those 5 categories, anybody that's in activity, that's basically involved in the activity of producing business or for the production of income. In addition, in part section 426 in the IRS publication 925, it further explores the special ruling that prevents individuals that I mentioned and prevents them from writing off more than the amounts they have invested, and that any unused portion of it can be carried over in the following year. This also takes into consideration basically the ruling for suspended losses. So what exactly did all of that mean? To further explore and clarify these rulings, let me share an example. Consider a New York City investor that invests 10K in a business, like I mentioned earlier, right? That business folds in 2019. This investor is actually in a 22% federal tax bracket, which is like the average, and 825 state income tax bracket for New York City. That's I believe that's the average for New York. So in 2020, he can recognize the amount of 3,025 to reduce his tax liability. You do that by taking the 10,000 and multiplying it by the by adding the federal tax bracket and the the state income tax bracket. You get 3025. 22 plus 825 is 3025. So you multiply that by 10,000 and you get 3025 that you can use to reduce your tax bracket. Now, to calculate his at-risk limitation, using the same scenario, if that investor instead suffered a loss, his own share of the loss, right? Not the whole, not his partners or just his share of that loss was 20 grand. With his initial investment of 10 grand, he will have an excess loss of 10K. Basically, you're taking the initial investment of 10K minus the loss of 20, and you're getting 10K. So that can be carried over in the following year. Now, in 2020, if he adds or contributes another 20K, right, he would be subjected to a risk limit. So if his risk limit would be 10K. How you calculate that is you're basically taking the added investment and you're subtracting the suspended loss of 10K from the prior year, and you're getting your risk limit of 10,000. Now, I hope that this clarified, some of the concept for the at-risk rules and limitations. I know that our tax system can be complicated, but as we travel through this journey together, I'm sure that it'll help us answer many different vagaries that we'll all have at some point in time, right? Well, I hope, like I said, I hope I clarified a bit on some of the thoughts on the at-risk rules and limitations, but here is my listed references and my research that I used to draw up this presentation. And as always, I wish you all good health and stay safe. Be well, and I'll see you in my next post.